So now I'd like to share a little bit about how Robert and I co-created this retreat. 10 years ago, no, 15 years ago, I took his workshop, Grace Notes, at Bon Secours Retreat Center in Maryland. And my father had just passed a month before, and I had gone on a trip to the Azores. So the Azores for me have been a spiritual place for 15, 20 years. I like traveling there. I feel safe there. I feel a spiritual connection. I feel guided to go there. So the process of the Grace Notes is that Robert asks a question or suggests a meditation, and then we write. And so what came was this experience I had in the Azores of putting my hand on this piece of moss shaped like a heart. And when I touched that piece of moss, excuse me, I still get verklempt. So much of the grief about my father's passing I felt like the moss invited me to release into it and then let it pass down into this vast ocean. So that's the story I shared with the group. And in response, Robert, of channeling, interpreted my story through music. And so I have this piece of music called Small Tuft of Moss, which represents that release process for me. He and I talked at that time about the Azores, and he had some connection with it, I don't remember. And I said, we're going to do some music, we're going to do this work there sometime. So 15 years later, last year, I'm doing my taxes and his business card falls out. And I said, it's time. So I called him and I said, what are you doing these days? Are you still doing Grace Notes? And he said, you're the third person that's reminded me of the importance of this work. So we started talking and co-creating how to combine his Grace Notes workshop with Soul Collage. So some of you are familiar with Soul Collage and some aren't. So at the time that I did Grace Notes with Robert, I wasn't into Soul Collage. And so it's taken me 10 years to make my Soul Collage card in response to that music, that soul song about the tuft of moss. So what I'm sharing with you is this is the process we're going to use it at the retreat. Not the only one, but one of them. And the history of how we created this, combining the music and the Grace Notes with Soul Collage. So I played his music, and this is the card I made in response to it 10 years later. So I'm going to stop for a moment and talk more about the Soul Collage process, and then I'll share more about this card.